Welcome to Operations Unfiltered, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of influencer and talent management. I like to think of it as the podcast where project management meets real life and sometimes real drama. I'm your host, Zarina, and today we're diving into a topic that I know keeps some public relations teams up at night. What is it, you might be asking? Crisis management in the age of cancel culture. If you've been anywhere near social media for the past few weeks, you've definitely seen the firestorms, from Diddy's multiple lawsuits to Jay-Z's firing back with his attorney, and even the rap battle between Drake and Kendrick. But what do these high-profile crises have to do with project management? Turns out, everything. Because when you strip away the fame and fortune, these situations are truly just high-stakes projects with urgent timelines, risk mitigation, and a whole lot of stakeholder management. So, without further ado, let's get into this week's episode of Operations Unfiltered. Let's start by defining what crisis management really is. At its core, crisis management is just project management under pressure. And just like any good project, it requires three key things: risk assessment, what's the worst that can happen and how do we prepare; stakeholder communication, who needs to know what and when; and last but not least, damage control and recovery. How do we move forward strategically? This applies whether you're managing a brand's reputation or leading a complex marketing campaign, because in both cases, missteps can cost you, whether it's in dollars, credibility, or client trust. Let's break these down with some current event case studies, okay? First, we're going to start by talking about Diddy's legal battles. I like to call this case study a project without a risk register. We all know that Diddy is facing multiple lawsuits, and the allegations have escalated to federal investigations. He's currently sitting in jail right now. His brand, both as a business mogul and music executive, is now in what I like to call reputation crisis mode. Translate that for me, Zarina. Of course, this is a worst case scenario that should have been on a risk register. From my purview, here's what's happening. There's clearly stakeholder foldout. I mean, Revolt dropped him. Celebrities are distancing themselves from him. It's just not looking good in that section for him. Crisis communication failure is big on his team. His team's responses have been minimal, leaving space for the narrative to be controlled by external voices like Shade Room, academics, everybody. And last but not least, they've had delayed risk mitigation. It seems like there's no visible proactive approach, no strong legal positioning, no major media strategy, no public crisis leadership. Honestly, if I were leading his crisis team, I'd be running a real-time incident response plan with clear roles for legal, PR, and media outreach. Because truly, in crisis management, silence is not golden. It's costly. Now let's flip the script and talk about Jay-Z's situation. I like to call this case study proactive stakeholder management. Jay-Z is taking legal action against attorney Tony Buzbee for dragging him into a lawsuit related to Diddy. But unlike Diddy, Jay-Z took control of the situation before it became a major crisis. From a project management perspective, Jay-Z's approach mirrors what I like to call proactive stakeholder management. He's not waiting for things to spiral. He's setting the record straight on his own terms. He filed a lawsuit before his name got tied too deeply into the controversy. Narrative control. His legal team publicly stated his position, which prevented further speculation. And last but not least, strategic communication. Jay-Z took it to court. He didn't argue on social media. He kept it professional. So, what can you take away from this situation? If you see a potential issue, don't wait for it to explode. Address it early with strategic risk mitigation. Okay, so the final case study that I want to address is, of course, Drake versus Kendrick. This is what I like to call when competitive projects collide. So when you think about the Drake and Kendrick situation, unfortunately, we have to say this is manufactured for engagement. Honestly, this beef has been brewing for years, but in the last few weeks, months, it's truly escalated into a full-blown project war. From a project management lens, this is truly a battle of brand positioning and strategic execution. On Drake's side, his strength is high frequency releases. The tactic that I find that he typically uses is staying consistent and flooding the market with music. He's the turn up king. People want to party with him. He always keeps himself at the center of conversation by dropping hits. Thinking of this through a project management lens, I kind of equate this to agile project management, meaning he iterates quickly, responds to competition in real time, and keeps up with the momentum. Kendrick, on the other hand, his strength is in scarcity and precision. I equate him more like waterfall project management. He waits for the right moment, gathers all the necessary resources or tea, and then he drops something that's super calculated. From a project management perspective, this is a long-term project strategy. Instead of reacting fast, he controls the pace. So when you look at both rappers and you look at this battle, it's essentially two competing project teams with different methodologies. So how do we determine who the winner is? It honestly comes down to execution. And the same applies for actual projects. You have to think about it like this. Do you want to iterate fast or do you want to build game-changing products? Both approaches can work, but you have to commit to one. So how do we apply this to our everyday work? Here's what we can take away from these situations. Number one, always have a risk register. Even if you're managing a social media campaign, ask yourself, what's the worst case scenario and how do I prepare? Number two, you have to control the narrative. In project management, this means setting expectations early and often. If things go left, communicate the why and your plan forward. And last but not least, you have to have a crisis response framework. Whether it's a PR disaster or a project that went wrong, a structured recovery plan keeps you from scrambling in the long run. At the end of the day, the projects that survive crises are the ones that have a game plan before the disaster strikes. Keep that in mind. All right, let's bring this episode on home with a section that I like to call Behind the Briefcase. It's where I take you behind the scenes of a real project that I'm working on or that a friend or a colleague is working on, and we just chat through how I've worked through it or how that person worked through it. Right now, I'm helping a client with a multi-city tour, and my main challenge is definitely securing media placements. Sounds simple, right? I mean, we're in the age of social media, one quick blast on Instagram, and you'll get all the media placements, right? Not so much. It's been a challenge, but here we are. How I've been managing the project is with a few simple things. First of all, Google Sheets has been my most valuable player. Every city that my client is going to has its own tab, and I've filled it out with media outlets that I plan to reach out to. It just makes things easier for me, keeping myself on task. Media placements and media outreach has definitely been challenging. When I graduated in 2016 from Stevenson University, go Mustangs, I relied heavily on a site called Help a Reporter Out, which is now defunct. Bring it back. I miss that site. But anyway, I currently use a site called Qwoted. It helps me match with journalists in real time in hopes of getting my clients that media coverage. And last but not least, follow up, follow up, follow up. I am the follow up queen. I will send 14 emails. I don't care. But honestly, if I don't hear back in 3 days, I typically bump it up the chain. No ghosting is allowed in project management, okay? So those are my 3 things. And honestly, if I can leave you with anything, it's a process, just like crisis management. You can't control everything, but you can control how you respond and adjust. And that's the difference between a project that sinks and one that thrives. Well, that's a wrap for today's episode. If you love this, please make sure to leave a review, share with your fellow project managers, content creators, anyone who's a marketing professional, and let's keep this conversation going. Until next time, keep your projects tight and your narratives tighter. I'll see you next time.